Darlene D, with some reading tips that can make your one-on-one reading time with your child engaging as well as productive. We know with the third grade reading law, which you will hear so much more about from me at a later time, but we know with this law that it is very important that we're reading with our children and that we're making sure that they are successful when it comes to reading. Reading has so many different layers. I want to make sure that we understand that reading is not just about giving our child a book or giving them a passage and say read. It is more about us in allowing them to engage in reading and to make sure that they're understanding what they're reading. When we talk about reading, we can always say if you can read, you can do anything. So we want to make sure, as I said earlier, we want to make sure that they're successful because there are so many different layers of reading. We want to make sure that we're touching on each area. A lot of times we have parents who say that my children can read because they've heard them read before, but there have been cases where children are able to read certain grade levels of materials, but they're not able to comprehend. And then you have areas where children can hear stories or stories that have been read to them, and they comprehend very well, but they cannot decode and they cannot read the information. So in order to strengthen all those different areas, we have to make sure that we are working in all of those areas, that we're working with the phonemic awareness and the phonics and the fluency as well as comprehension. So all of those areas need to be enriched when we're talking about reading. Today I want to talk about comprehension though. We want to make sure that we're engaging and that they're treating it, or we treat it, like a book club where it's a discussion. And we also want children to not think about reading as a chore, but we want them to explore or maybe even think of it as an adventure. One of the materials or one of the tools that I use when I'm working with my students is, we call it reading dice. We will throw the dice and it will come, whichever question it lands on, that's the question that we ask when they're reading. And so this particular one says problem. What is the problem in the story? So as they're reading, because sometimes you can do this as you're reading, or you can let them read the whole story. And what we call it is chunking, when we do a little along the way, because you can't eat a whole pizza at once, right? You eat it slice by slice. So you can have them read certain sections, or if they're reading some type of novel, you can read the chapter, or you can break it down by paragraphs, or the same way if it's in a passage. But we will use, and they have different questions depending on the type of questions you like to ask. Like one of the things is, why did things turn out the way they did? Or you may have one that says, when did the story take place? These are just different questions that you would ask during reading. How did the problem get solved? We also have one that talks about making connections. What connection can you make between your experiences? And we have visualizing. One of the questions, what picture formed in your mind when you read this section? Because we also want our children to visualize when they're reading. It's just think about what the story was about. When I would say, what knowledge do you have that helped you to make your prediction? I would even start in the beginning and say, what do you think this story is going to be about? Or what do you think is going to happen next? As we were reading, if I wanted to know, what do you think is going to happen next? So these are just questions that talk about inferencing. I don't know if you can see that, but making inferences based on the information that you have. How are you inferring? Just different types of questions that are on the dice. If you don't have the dice to cause extra thinking, not a problem at all. All you need is a jar and some index cards. And I took the same questions that were on the dice, and I took them and I wrote them down on index cards. These are some of the questions. I wrote them on the index cards, folded them up, put them inside the jar, and instead of me throwing the dice, I just shake up the jar and allow myself or the child to pull one out. And whatever they pull out, that's the question that you would ask as they're reading the text or once they've finished the text, whichever way you decided to do it. But like I said, I know you don't have, if you might not have these materials, don't let that stop you. There is always a way to make it work. So once again, old-fashioned mason jar, questions on the inside. Here is events. It says what important things happened in the story. Now, as I said, we want to talk about more thinking. So if you ask that question and they answer, you can always go a little bit further and say, well, what event led up to the problem? And then if they answer that and say, well, why was that event so important? So many different things. We definitely want our children to have conversations and to do more thinking when it comes to the reading, not just answer the question, what color was the dress the girl had on, but we definitely want them to do more thinking. And this is how we do it, with asking these type of questions as they're reading. And like I said, if you don't have the dice, not a problem at all. This is just an old-fashioned mason jar, and I took index cards and wrote down the different questions on the dice. And when you pull them, you just pull them out of max. And remember, I said always want to extend the thinking. Question we can ask that will always promote comprehension is why. Anytime we want to go a little bit further with the question, or we want them to think a little bit more, ask the question why. That's all I've got for today, but I will be back. And if you have any questions or concerns, please make sure you leave them in the bottom of the video here, and I will be checking back and forth so that I can answer those questions for you. Just want to make sure that our children are successful. So please make sure that you stay safe and don't stop reading. See you later.